Hello.
Hello. Thank you for agreeing to chat with me today about birth and feminism and obstetric violence and all of that stuff. And
And who knows what?
who knows what? And koalas.
Iguanas.
Yeah. So, can we start? Can you just tell me a bit about you and what brings you to this topic?
To the topic of obstetric violence in particular.
Yeah, and birth
Yeah.
and feminism.
Yeah, so I I'd never know where to start because I think it's kind of, if I look at my life backwards, I tend to tell the story of when I was about 8 or 10, that we were visiting a friend of my grandfather, and she was a peculiar woman. In retrospect, I think that she was a feminist probably, and I didn't know that. She was the only woman in the village that was wearing trousers, so that sort of woman. And she collected lots of antiques, and she has a very interesting house. And we went to visit with my parents, and one of the objects she had was a ceramic pot, but it was very particular because it was quite tall,
Right.
and it had a sort of rim and a sort of hollow bit, and I didn't know what it was. I never seen anything like that. And I asked her what it was. And she explained that it was called a parideira in the northwest of Galicia, of Spain, which is Galicia, in that region. So she said it with this dialect, and she said a parideira. And I asked, what's that? And she was like, well, women use it to birth. I think this is from 1700s or 1800s, and she explained that she just picked it up from the seaside. So anyway, that happened, and I then, when I became an NCT teacher many years later in 2009, I sent a letter to this woman who was by then 96. And I just say to her, I wanted to thank you because you took the time to explain to a little girl what something was. And that by doing so, you probably introduced the thought of vertical birthing in my brain. So thereafter, I already had that in my head. I was normal, and that was something that women did. So she replied back, and funny enough, she told me a very interesting birth story. I need to rescue that for something, for a book or something, because it was very interesting what she told me. But however, that was the first instance that I think I contemplated birth somehow. But thereafter, I spent many afternoons with my mom in our shop, and it was a topic that fascinated me. So I always asked her, so how was it when you were pregnant? And the funny thing was that I hated children at the time. This sounds a bit heavy, but we had a shop for children's clothes, and it was lots of children. So I always felt that they were the invaders of my space somehow. So I didn't quite like that. And I didn't like the fact that a lot of my friends were already having pictures of babies. When you went to high school and they had pictures of babies, and it became sort of trend. And I never understood that. It felt very cheesy to me. I was more punk. So anyway, yeah, I asked lots of things because I thought it was super interesting, the idea of having a baby inside of you, and how did that process work. So that was another aspect to it. And then, as I say, going forward, 2009, I after I had my first baby, I decided to become an antenatal teacher, because I put all those things together, and I realized that I really, really enjoy talking about pregnancy, finding out things about pregnancy. Um, so in terms of obstetric violence, it was almost simultaneous to that, because I used to go to lots of forums and internet, but they were all in Spanish because I felt like, quite lonely in that aspect. So I was trying to see what other women did with their babies in Spain versus in England. And as I was explaining lots of things that have happened to me that I assume natural, like having a straightforward birthing hospital, which I have the honor to talk about in your book, Positive Birth. So to have a positive experience of a hospital birth in the UK versus what they told me about in Spain, for me it was like, but why are they doing this and why are they doing that? And then I suggested to have birthing pools in Spain, and I went to investigate how can we bring birthing pools, and so on. And then I discovered that it was, to them, I was absolutely mad thinking that I could do that. And a friend of mine said, but Mara, what are you trying to do? You're trying to have birthing pools when we cannot even have a birthing plan. So I think that hit me. And then I thought, okay, so my life happened to be in London, but what if I was a mother in Spain, you know? So I think that sort of, I don't know, sliding
Yeah.
door sort of situation, you
Yeah, and
know?
I think that's a really good point when we look at outside of our own sort of cultural bubble and see what birth is like in other cultures. That's why the internet has been so brilliant, I think,
Mm.
for pregnant women, because as soon as you start talking to women outside of your own little bubble and you hear about birthing practices and what is allowed or not allowed in other
Mm.
countries, you either realize, oh, actually, I have a lot more freedom here, or you realize actually this advice that I'm being given, which I'm being told is, really crucial for my safety or the safety of the baby, this woman in this other place is not being given. So
Yeah,
what's going on?
exactly.
So for you, that
Because
came naturally because you've already got that link between two different cultures, I guess.
yeah, but it came naturally, but then it was very shocking because I grew up with my mother telling me this kind of like the last stories of birthing at home in Spain. So, I grew up with my mother saying, no, birth was normal. Yeah, your aunt was birthing while she was cooking. And then, so-and-so came, and it was all very home birth sort of ordinary affair, if you wish, So that, in a way, with me then in London having a sort of positive experience, but in a technocratic model, if you wish. And then the other extreme of that is like the daughters or the granddaughters of these women that birth at home quite normally, naturally, however you want to call it, then we're having like the mega ultra technocratic abusive obstetric violence model, So for me, that was also like, how can you go from there to there? What has led us there? So it's a very odd thing, and also to see women like my friends that they have. They weren't their mothers. They have achieved so much. They had, they were high power type of women in their careers, so subservient.
Mm.
For me, that was another point that I was like, but why? Why are you kind of following this? And why are you thinking, another, I have lots of different things that come to mind. Another thing that I remember was that I was sitting having something to eat with my friends, I think probably 20 years ago. And we were talking about our birth experiences somehow. And then they say something like, no, because when you go to hospital, you have to get rid of all your jewelry, your clothes, and put everything into a rubbish bag and you give it to them. And I remember that I just said, I think the only other place I can think of doing that will be jail. So it's quite interesting. It's like, what are you on about? So, it was a lot of that all throughout. I mean, I have 3 children. They are now 21, 16, and 11. And throughout their births and everything, I have been in touch with Spain, but other countries, because when I became an activist, then what you were saying, it opens up, and then you're thinking, surely science is science.
Mm.
I remember another key moment when I read some statistics I think it was a book about urology, and they were talking about episiotomies being 100% in Taiwan and Guatemala and 5% in Denmark. And I was like,
Yeah.
no, that can't happen. How do you argue that? What's wrong with women in Taiwan? Or
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think you were a feminist before? Have you always felt yourself to be a feminist before you got into the topic of birth?
uh, I remember talking to you many, many years ago about things like this, when I was the one interviewing you. But the answer is no. Probably I didn't call myself a feminist. But I was, in a way, because I was always angry about the injustice that I realized very early on. I have 2 brothers, and it was very quick that I thought, oh, hold on a minute. I thought we were going the same place. I thought we were the same. And then, when after adolescence, or when I began to be an adolescent, I realized that no, I'm now a piece of meat for men, and now I am attracting all this unwanted attention. And that was quite a shock, that awareness of the body, what I call the body as a cage, or the body as a bomb is another concept, that you carry this bomb, and you're responsible for it, which I think is more to do with birth. I always felt that way. But yeah, feminists as said, okay, I am a feminist. I think it was later on, I think I progressed from activism around birth into, okay, no, this is part of a bigger picture, and I have to deal with this as part of feminism.
Why do you feel that birth is a feminist issue? I know that's a really difficult question to answer, but is there anything you can say about that?
I tend to summarize that saying because it's a woman's issue. And nowadays that's like by the way, I was thinking, I'm wearing this t-shirt that I made I have a little shop of t-shirts, and it says I am with JK, but I'm thinking I need to add and with Millie and with, I have to have a very long list.
You get one of those fabric pens and add names.
I thought of doing something before we started, to show you. Yeah, I think it's fundamentally because it's a woman's issue. And with that, of course, we're encapsulating the fact that because women are oppressed, because there is a hierarchy, because, what happens in birth is highly political and is not by chance. It is, to me, it's not only there's a feminist issue. To me, it's the feminist issue. I mean, it's so inherent to, I'm saying the wrong word, I'm thinking in Spanish now, but it's so much the crux of the matter, in the sense of, I have a little workshop that I do about Mary Wollstonecraft, and I speak about how Mary Wollstonecraft dies of puerperal fever after they remove the placenta with dirty hands. But I think it's so significant because Mary didn't want to give birth with doctors. She wanted to give birth with a midwife. And you see that in that moment in time, the mother of feminism, in a way, is fighting to retain those rights. And it's the invasion of those that they thought they knew better that contaminate through sepsis and so on. And she dies. And she was writing a book, I don't know if you know this, she was writing a book in which she talked about a community of women, and the character called Mary as well dies. I think the character dies 9 days after giving birth, and Mary Wollstonecraft died 11 days after. So it's, for me, is that the unresolved issue. I think that motherhood is a traumatic event in feminism, or a traumatic political issue. And I think that we are, sooner or later, we're going to have to face it. I think that if there is a positive or silver lining in this wonderful times that we're living, that's sarcasm, sorry. But in terms of what's going on now with this discussion of the metaphysical aspects of what is a woman, I will say that the silver lining to that is that a lot of the feminist agenda now is looking back again, to, okay, we have a body. Because I think that will be my criticism. I think from the 70s, we kind of forgot a bit that we were a body. And there's nothing wrong with, I don't think it's superficial. I don't think it's trivial. I think that we have to unify everything, the theory, the mind that we have as women, the conquest of the mind of women, the intellectual of women, but also with, is the body that is the battleground, is the body where they are coming to get our rights first,
Yes, and I know you talk also a lot about reproductive justice and the losing that's currently going on of abortion rights. How do you see that how does that relate to perhaps a UK woman giving birth? What's the link there?
Because I think that in general, that's the discussion. And when I was teaching classes or facilitating classes to expecting parents, what is underneath the question from a husband when they say, but surely there is a time where she will be too tired and I have to decide, or the doctor has to decide, but surely when she's contracting, she cannot think, or, these kind of questions of like, I need to also be part of decision making, and how difficult it was always to say, in this country, unless a woman is sectioned, and even then, it's always the woman who makes the decision. And I don't know how many times I had to repeat that, and how difficult it was to comprehend. And to me, that is the same as abortion rights. It's the same thought process. It's like, well, but women giving birth is surely something that belongs to society. I think that's how people look at it. And when you go like, no, actually, it belongs to us.
Yeah, and it's also, for me, it's also about the autonomy and about who takes priority, the woman or the baby, which is a really interesting question for people to think about, even if they I haven't got anything to do with abortion on their radar. Like, what would you do in a situation where you had to choose between your life and your unborn child's life, if that was a wanted baby? And I've spoken to people about this, and usually they say that they would prioritize their own life, which, but that can make them feel very uncomfortable to admit that, because we kind of still have these huge deep roots which somehow have carried this message that once a woman is pregnant, it's the unborn baby that's more important, that takes priority. And then in the birth room, that somehow plays out in the power dynamics, doesn't it, where the woman has to be that kind of like good woman who's obedient and who is willing to sacrifice her everything for the baby. And then we have the phrase, the healthy baby is all that matters. And I see those things as all interlinked.
Absolutely. But, I talk about this. This is going to sound like product placement, but, the audience is English, so it's not. In my book, which is Parte Feminismo, Birth and Feminism in Spanish, I talk about that. And I think what is important is that, I say something along the lines like, a mother may choose to end her life for the sake of her baby. She might do that. A lot of us in labor are just thinking of like, whatever is needed, in a way, when you're thinking whatever, and sometimes when the head of the baby is coming out, I felt it like, I don't know what's happening here, maybe ripping apart, but it's an act of sacrifice of sorts, but that's not the same as to somebody deciding that for us. It's a very different thing. You may have that idea of self-sacrificing, but to assume that women are sacrificable, that they have to have an instinct of self-sacrifice, is a very different story for me.
Sure. And it's a really interesting question to ask people, in particular, maybe midwives and obstetricians, like, okay, so what if the woman wants to make a dangerous decision? That's when we see, I think, how free or not free women actually are in their birth choices, because often professionals in particular, or anyone, will say, oh yeah, I completely support a woman's right to do whatever she wants. It's her body, it's her choice. But then if you say, okay, so she wants to do this thing and it's definitely going to end badly, then they're like, oh no, she can't do that.
Yeah, no. But I always say, the thing with that is, is the culture, and it's the culture through movies, through the Bible, through all sorts of religion, through every little message in society. And I always see it very clear, and I talk about it, about Mary and Eve. So you have the Virgin Mary, which is the vessel who is sacrificable. She's going to do this for the greater good of patriarchy. And then you have the minute that woman makes a decision, she's going to turn into Eve. And I always felt like that in pregnancy and witnessing other issues with obstetric violence, women were some sort of asexual cloud angel, I don't know what, carrying this baby, and everybody's like, oh, and touching you and all these things, and oh, you look lovely, you're glowing. If you say in that conversation that you're thinking of having a home birth, or who knows, you are the one with the apple there about to kill the entire humankind. It's just like, it's fascinating to observe. And I think that it's so much like that. And that duality persists in every single, it's the same when, I don't know, in the UK, but in Spain, for example, when I was 16 and men were saying things to me in the street, if I retaliate, I was ugly, I was a whore, I was this, I was that, So it's that sort of it's constant, and I use it, I use an example, I think it's Mad Men, because I have written as well about movies and the influence in birth, and it's great to see this scene in Mad Men in which they are talking in terms of marketing that they are going to sell the two women. They're going to sell, what's her name? Wife of Kennedy, I forgot.
I don't know.
Oh, yes.
Don't worry.
No, but Jacqueline Kennedy versus Marilyn Monroe, so they are talking about this duality. She's the wife, she has dark hair, she's the blonde, she's the sexy, and they're going to use it to sell, I think, pantyhose or something like that, and they say something that to me is the constant duality that patriarchy is imposing in women, constant, and in birth is the same.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about obstetric violence. I know that you have campaigned around this and begun the Roses Revolution. Is that something that's you're still doing? And can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, so it's still going. I'm trying to reconnect with some of the women doing that, partially because I'm now the lead for obstetric violence in FiLiA as well. So I'm just trying to catch up and know exactly what's going on in every country after taking some sort of break. But I also gave up the movement somehow. It was a moment that I decided that the movement in itself belonged to women, and and it was great to see that they were doing different things with it in different places. It became massive in Germany, to the point that a lot of people think that it started in Germany.
So just for people who are listening who haven't heard about it, the idea was
of course, sorry.
concept, but to explain,
Yeah, so the Roses Revolution is a movement, it's a global movement against obstetric violence, and it's a movement that I initiated in 2011 as a response to the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists in Spain, who published in their website some horrible comic strip in which they laughed at women's prolapse of uterus. They laugh at having HPV. They laugh at anything, women wanting to have a birth plan. And they thought that was okay. It was okay for the Society of Gynecologists to have that comic strip there. And women got super angry, as you can imagine, when they find out. And at that time, I was quite popular online, and lots of women came to me and said, we have to do something. And I think somebody say we should take a brick and throw it at them or something. I cannot remember. And I don't know, the discussion went about whether it was a violent protest or not. And then I suggested, well, why don't we take a rose? Because a lot of women used to say that they hated the fact that after having horrible experiences in Spain, they still went and gave them a box of chocolates or flowers, And in retrospect, when they start analyzing how their experiences went, they felt very guilty about that. So I said, okay, let's just bring the flowers, as we may have done, But then in the flowers, we're going to put a note with the stories of violence. I did that as well because I was working with Sheila Kissinger in Birth Crisis, which was a helpline that Sheila created. And she was always telling us to try, or she taught us to try to do something physical, some sort of ritual that could help women, whatever that was. And I created that with an idea of perhaps the women doing that will benefit, even if they don't care about these messages. And that took off. I have to say, I confess here that I cheated a bit because I created events on Facebook in every single city, and everybody thought I was going to go to those events. I was in London, and I created some sort of, propagation of something. So women will say, oh, there's this event here, but who do I contact? I was like, no, you do it. You can lead it. So,
clever way around to do it.
So yeah, and it took off, and then it became very popular, as I was saying, in Germany. And it has been featured in news and the newspapers there, in Hungary as well, lots of places. And the most interesting thing that has happened is that it's been part of an exhibition that has been in different museums in Austria and Barcelona and so on. And I almost find out by chance that they were doing that, which is quite amazing.
That is brilliant and amazing that it's kind of put obstetric violence on, the idea of it, the words to describe it into people's minds, because I think sometimes people don't really understand what obstetric violence is, and I sometimes wonder whether it's a good term, because it sounds so extreme that I think some people draw back from it and think, oh no, that wasn't what happened to me. So do you want to say a little bit about what falls under the definition of obstetric violence?
Yeah, I have changed the definition a couple of times because I have one that I've been quoted on, but lately I'm so upset with the whole thing. I think I went for something more radical, which I don't remember now. But in terms of the term, well, you know, it's always a discussion whether it's too much or not. I even, you know, I had two experiences about that. One was when I started talking about this in Spain. I had so much opposition. They thought we were crazy talking in those terms. People would say, no, you shouldn't talk about violence. That's too much, you know.
Mm.
Particularly with one male midwife, I had a discussion on it because he wanted to support, but he said, there's no way I can call violent my colleagues and so on. And I thought about it. I thought, am I being unfair? Am I being too far out with this, you know? And then I thought, I'm with the women. The women feel that they have been, you know, they talk about violence, they talk about rape, they talk about, you know, feeling those things. That's what they feel. You know, I'm not going to start playing the game of like whether you are upset about it, whether if, and we're still caught up with that. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but we had two sentences now from the United Nations in Spain against obstetric violence within the frame of misogynist violence. The headlines are obstetric violence doesn't exist in Spain. Doctors are very upset about this.
Mm. Yeah.
10 years later, 12 years later, you know.
It's astonishing to me that there is always that pushback, that sort of outrage, like how could you accuse us of this when it's actually women who are just relaying the most terrible experiences. But I kind of guess it's a bit like the not all men kind of hashtag, exactly. Isn't it? It pushes that button where people want to distance themselves from it. They're not dealing with their own feelings very well.
No,
basically.
But again, it's always about the feelings, you know. It's always it's a tone policing, distracting tactic.
Yeah.
You know, and I think my son the other day, he was commenting, my oldest, you know, unfortunately they're reading a lot of feminist material, and he was talking about he chose porn over me, and he was saying, no, it's quite interesting, read mom, but you know, and then he started talking about the men, and again, you know, and I said to him, I don't care. That's not it. It's not it. And sometimes I have this fatigue that I must come across like, you know, this woman just doesn't even listen. But it's just like, no, I'm done with having to think of the feelings of the abuser, having to think of the, you know, no, I'm not doing it. You know, it's about us women and what we're expressing. And if you don't start listening, you know, it's your issue.
I 100% agree.
But notice that.
Yeah, it is tiring because I mean, I was going to say this, you know, in terms of like, I like to take a sort of solution focused approach to things, and but that is hard to keep doing. That gets tiring, doesn't it? Because you just think, what is the solution to this? I mean, you and I have both been involved in this conversation and trying to do in our different ways, trying to do something helpful. And you were connected to Sheila Kitzinger, who's a massive hero of mine, who you know was in it for decades before we were even thinking about it, and yet still here we are. And it just seems like you know, I was reading about the sort of latest Care Quality Commission report last week, and it seems like everything's just getting worse and worse. The numbers of women being induced in that report was something like over 40%. You know, so many women birthing in hospital, so many women still experiencing obstetric violence and not even realizing that it's violence because they're talking
Black babies dying. Sorry to add, Black babies dying, and still everybody asking me why, and me saying why, you know. So
yes, exactly. So all of that is happening, and it's not improving, and we are still saying these things, and no one seems to be changing anything or listening. And if anything, you find yourself being shouted down as some kind of like radical nutcase.
Oh
So
yeah,
what do
constantly.
we do? Can you inspire me,
Well,
or are you feeling the same, like, oh?
you know, funny enough, I was thinking about this because I'm in a moment of I don't want to take part. The world is a scary place. I have done this too long, and I'm getting old, and I just want to look at koala videos, as I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
Hence the koala mention. There's an aspect of that. There's an aspect of they invite me to conferences, and sometimes I'm saying, "You're insulting me," because I told you all this. I don't want to be saying the same 10 years later. It's offensive now that I have to explain to you what obsessive violence is, and so on. And I have this kind of posture sometimes. People don't know how to handle me. But it is, I think it's an unavoidable responsibility. This is what I was concluding in my head. It's like, it's the only option we have. It's frustrating. Sometimes I don't want to do it. Sometimes I don't want to fight. Sometimes I don't want to be not only the victim, the survivor, but also the one that teaches the world about it. I want to, live my life because it's time consuming. It's consuming me from doing other things. I want to learn how to do a documentary. I want to read 100 books. I don't want to be every day shouting the same stuff that, nobody seems to listen to. But on the other hand, I feel like, I say it many times that patriarchy is a cage, in which we all live. And unfortunately, I rebel against the idea that I have to do this feminist thing, but I don't see any other option. Because it gets to a point that I say many times, if all I have left or all that I can do is to make sure that it's clear that I'm not compliant with my oppression, then I will do that until I die. That's the positive note you were looking for? Probably not, but
well, no, I think it kind of is, because I think you're saying that we have to keep going, and we have to find that energy somehow, and just not burn out and keep repeating the same messages, even if that is exasperating.
More positive than that is that I am part of FiLiA. You were in FiLiA. You know how amazing that is. For those that don't know, come to FiLiA conference in the 2023 in Glasgow. But I'm talking about FiLiA because I think I feel better now to take these breaks. I feel better to look at koala videos because I know it's a lot of us out there. And I think that's one thing that perhaps is the positive note, is don't forget or don't buy into the bullshit, excuse me, that we are actually more. It's tons of us doing things, tons of us. So, that also allows for you not to have this desperation I used to have, like, I have to do everything and I have to, I was going to save the entire world myself. So
yeah, I think that's a really good point, that there's so much feminist action at the moment, isn't there, and activism, women organizing, and actually birth has really become more prominent on the sort of feminist agenda, I think, in the last few years,
yeah.
thanks to people like you and FiLiA. I'll put a link in the under the podcast. Is really has both the last few conferences I've been to at FiLiA have had birth and motherhood and all kinds of other related topics on the agenda, which has been just so brilliant to see that it's kind of being integrated, because it has been sort of left behind a bit, I think, hasn't it, until recently.
Yeah, the agenda is so big, and unfortunately, we have a massive feminist agenda, and now we have to start at the basics of what is a woman. So it's always, it's only getting more difficult.
Yeah, that's right. We could do another whole podcast talking about women's words. But we have to kind of stop in a minute. But it's been absolutely brilliant to talk to you, and thank you so much for your activism and for your wisdom and for your passion and for not giving up.
I can say the same to you, and it's an honor that you invited me. Thank you so much, Millie.
Thank you so much.